The Story of Life.
Why don't you allow yourself to rest? Maya was a woman of relentless drive. Her days were filled with tasks, goals, and a never-ending list of things to accomplish. From the moment she woke up until she fell into bed at night, her mind raced with thoughts of what needed to be done next. Her friends admired her for her productivity and success, but deep down, Maya felt something was missing. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Maya found herself unable to sleep. Her body ached, and her mind refused to shut off. As she stared at the ceiling, she began to wonder why she was always so tired, so drained. She was successful, yes, but at what cost? The next morning, as she prepared to dive into another busy day, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. These were signs she had ignored for too long. For the first time in years, Maya allowed herself to ask a simple question. Why don't you allow yourself to rest? She decided to take a day off, something she hadn't done in a long time. No emails, no phone calls, no to-do lists. Just a day for herself. She spent the morning walking in the park, the afternoon reading a book she had long forgotten, and the evening in quiet reflection. As the day came to an end, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. She realized that rest wasn't a luxury, but a necessity. It was in those moments of rest that she could reconnect with herself, recharge her spirit, and find clarity in her life. From that day forward, Maya made rest a priority. She learned to listen to her body and mind, understanding that rest wasn't a sign of weakness, but a source of strength. And in giving herself the permission to rest, she discovered a deeper joy and fulfillment in life than she had ever known.
You're listening to Stories of Life on the M. Bryan channel. This series is crafted to bring you comfort and tranquility, perfect for winding down at the end of the day. Each story is a gentle escape, guiding you through moments that soothe the mind and ease you into a peaceful sleep.
The Garden of Rest. Lena was known in her town as the woman who never stopped. Her days were a blur of work, errands, and commitments. She was always on the move, constantly busy, her mind racing with thoughts of what needed to be done next. Even in the quiet of the night, her mind refused to quiet down. One day, while walking through a part of town she rarely visited, Lena stumbled upon a small, hidden garden. It was overgrown and wild, yet it had a certain tranquility about it. A worn sign at the entrance read, "The Garden of Rest." Curious, Lena stepped inside. As she wandered through the garden, she noticed that each plant seemed to be thriving in its own time. Some flowers were in full bloom, while others were still budding, waiting for their moment. The trees provided shade, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Lena found a bench under a large oak tree and sat down. For the first time in what felt like years, she allowed herself to simply sit and be. She listened to the birds, watched the sunlight dance through the leaves, and felt the tension in her shoulders slowly melt away. As she sat there, Lena realized that life, like the garden, had its own seasons. There was a time for growth, for blooming, and there was a time for rest. She had been so focused on pushing forward, on always doing more, that she had forgotten the importance of rest. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the peace of the garden fill her. In that moment, Lena made a promise to herself. She would return to this garden, not just as a visitor, but as a regular, making time for rest a part of her life. She would learn to embrace the quiet moments, to let herself pause and recharge. When Lena left the garden that day, she felt lighter, more at ease. The weight of her endless tasks had lessened, and she knew that she would carry the lesson of the garden with her. Rest wasn't something to be earned or a luxury. It was a necessity, a gift she needed to give herself. From that day forward, Lena's life changed. She found balance between her work and her rest, understanding that both were essential for a life well lived. The Garden of Rest became her sanctuary, a reminder that true growth comes not just from effort, but also from the peace found in moments of stillness.
The pause that changed everything. Ethan was always in a rush. As a software developer in a fast-growing tech company, his calendar was packed with deadlines, meetings, and project updates. He loved his job, but the pressure to stay ahead was relentless. It wasn't uncommon for him to skip meals, work through weekends, and pull all-nighters just to keep up. One day, after another late night at the office, he noticed something odd. His hands, once steady, trembled as he typed. His vision blurred, and a dull headache throbbed in the background. He brushed it off, telling himself he just needed a bit more coffee. But things didn't get better. The next morning, he barely managed to get out of bed. His body felt heavy, like it was refusing to move. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't want to go to work. Panic crept in. How could he afford to slow down now, when so many people were relying on him? That afternoon, he went to see his doctor, expecting a prescription to fix everything. Instead, the doctor leaned back in his chair and said, "Ethan, your body is sending you a message. You need to rest." Rest? Ethan couldn't believe it. How could rest solve anything? He had so much to do. But the more he resisted, the more his body resisted him. With no other choice, he reluctantly agreed to take a few days off. At first, it was torture. He felt guilty for every minute he wasn't working. But on the second day, something shifted. Sitting quietly in his apartment, Ethan realized how long it had been since he had done nothing. No emails, no code, no stress, just a moment of peace. As he allowed himself to rest, his mind began to clear. Ideas he had been struggling with at work suddenly clicked into place. Problems he had been stuck on for weeks now seemed easy to solve. He realized that in his constant rush to be productive, he had forgotten how powerful a simple pause could be. By the end of the week, Ethan felt like a new person. He returned to work with fresh energy, and his team noticed the difference. He was more focused, more creative, and even more productive. He understood now that rest wasn't time wasted. It was time well spent. It gave him the space to recharge, to think deeply, and to come back stronger. From that point on, Ethan made rest a non-negotiable part of his routine. He didn't wait for burnout to force him to stop. He learned to listen to his body and give himself the rest he needed before it was too late. And in that simple pause, he found a clarity and strength that transformed not just his work, but his life.
You're listening to Stories of Life on the M. Bryan channel. This series is crafted to bring you comfort and tranquility, perfect for winding down at the end of the day. Each story is a gentle escape, guiding you through moments that soothe the mind and ease you into a peaceful sleep.
The journey back to balance. Lynn was known for her energy. She managed a successful marketing agency, juggled multiple clients, and was always on top of the latest trends. To outsiders, she seemed unstoppable, someone who could handle any challenge that came her way. Her colleagues admired her for her resilience and discipline, and her family often boasted about her achievements. But deep inside, Lynn knew something was wrong. It had started gradually. First, it was the occasional headache she attributed to stress. Then it was the sleepless nights, tossing and turning, thinking about projects that seemed never ending. Her to-do list had taken over her life. No matter how much she accomplished, the list kept growing, and, with it, the pressure she placed on herself. Her mornings were spent rushing from one task to the next, grabbing a quick coffee and skipping breakfast. By the time she sat down at her desk, her phone was already buzzing with emails and messages. She worked late into the night, often losing track of time until her eyes burned from staring at the screen. Weekends weren't much better. She found herself checking her phone for work updates even when she was supposed to be spending time with friends and family. Lynn told herself it was just a phase. She believed that if she worked hard enough now, she would eventually earn the right to relax. But the reality was, she couldn't remember the last time she felt truly relaxed. Even when she took short breaks, her mind was always racing, thinking about the next deadline. Then, one day, her body gave out. It was a Thursday afternoon, and she was in the middle of a client presentation when her vision blurred. Her head spun, and she felt a wave of dizziness. She tried to push through, to focus on the task at hand, but her body refused to cooperate. The next thing she knew, she was on the floor, her colleagues rushing to her side. The doctors told her it was burnout, complete physical and mental exhaustion. Lynn was ordered to take time off immediately. For someone who had built her identity around being productive, this was a nightmare. How could she just stop working when there was so much to do? She felt guilty, ashamed. She felt guilty, ashamed even, as if taking a break meant she had failed in some way. The first few days at home were agonizing. Lynn tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't let her. She kept thinking about the emails piling up, the projects falling behind. But as the days passed, something inside her began to shift. She realized that she had been living in survival mode for so long. She realized that she had been living in survival mode for so long that she had forgotten how to simply be. On the fourth day of her forced break, Lynn decided to take a walk. It was a sunny morning, the kind she used to love but hadn't paid attention to in years. She walked through the park near her apartment, noticing how the leaves rustled gently in the breeze and how the sunlight filtered through the trees. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lynn allowed herself to breathe deeply. She hadn't realized how tense she had been, always rushing from one thing to the next. She sat on a bench and just watched the world go by. Kids played on the swings, birds chirped in the distance, and a couple strolled hand in hand along the path. There was no urgency, no pressing need to check her phone or think about work. It was just her, the moment, and a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Calm. As the days turned into weeks, Lynn began to rediscover parts of herself she had neglected. She picked up the guitar she hadn't touched in years, started journaling again, and took time to reconnect with friends over slow, unhurried lunches. She read books that weren't related to work and watched movies she'd missed. At first, it felt strange, as if she was wasting time. But slowly, she realized that these moments of rest were giving her something she hadn't even realized she was missing: perspective. In those quiet moments, Lynn started to reflect on why she had pushed herself so hard for so long. She had always equated productivity with self-worth. If she wasn't working, she wasn't valuable. But now, with some distance from her work, she began to see things differently. Rest wasn't a reward she had to earn. It was a necessity, a crucial part of maintaining balance in her life. After a month away from work, Lynn felt like a different person. When she finally returned to her office, she approached things with a new mindset. She set boundaries for herself, making sure to take regular breaks and not let her work consume every waking moment. She learned to delegate more and trust her team to handle things without her constant oversight. But the biggest change wasn't in her work habits. It was in how she viewed herself. She no longer saw rest as a luxury or a weakness. Instead, She understood that allowing herself time to recharge made her stronger, more focused, and ultimately more effective in both her work and personal life. Now, when Lynn feels the familiar pull of burnout creeping in, she listens to her body and mind. She takes a step back, a deep breath, and reminds herself that rest is just as important as work. And in that space of stillness, she finds the clarity and peace that helps her move forward. The Journey of Lan. Lan knew she had to make a change, but the idea of slowing down terrified her. What if she fell behind? What if people thought she was weak? But the voice inside her, the one she had ignored for so long, whispered something different. It told her that rest wasn't weakness. It was necessary. The next morning, for the first time in years, Lan didn't set an alarm. She decided to take a few days off from work. Despite the guilt that tugged at her, she spent the first day in bed, sleeping in and letting her body recuperate. But it wasn't just sleep that she needed. It was a deeper kind of rest. She needed to reconnect with herself. On the second day, Lan decided to visit a place she hadn't been in years, a small park on the outskirts of the city. It was quiet, with only the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. As she walked through the park, something inside her began to soften. The tension in her shoulders eased, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she took a deep, full breath. Lan found a bench near the pond and sat down. The water was calm, its surface reflecting the sky above. As she watched the gentle ripples, she realized that this was what she had been missing: stillness. In the quiet of the park, away from the noise of her busy life, she began to hear her own thoughts again. For hours, she sat there, allowing herself to just be. No deadlines, no meetings, no pressure to perform. It was a strange feeling at first, uncomfortable even. But as the minutes passed, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. In that moment, Lan realized that rest wasn't about doing nothing. It was about giving herself permission to pause, to breathe, to reflect. Over the next few days, Lan continued to explore this new relationship with rest. She started journaling, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. She wrote about her fears, her dreams, and the things she had been too busy to notice about herself. As the words flowed onto the page, she began to uncover parts of herself that had been buried beneath years of busyness and stress. She realized that she had been running not just from exhaustion, but from herself. She had been using work as a way to avoid confronting the deeper questions of her life, questions about who she was and what she truly wanted. In the stillness, these questions came to the surface, and while they were uncomfortable, they also felt like the beginning of something new. By the end of the week, Lan felt a shift. She wasn't completely healed, but she had taken the first steps toward a different kind of life, one that made room for rest, reflection, and self-compassion. She returned to work with a new sense of clarity and purpose. She began setting boundaries, making time for herself, and most importantly, listening to her body when it told her to slow down. Lan's journey didn't end with that week of rest. It became an ongoing practice. She learned that healing wasn't a one-time event. It was a process. And it was in the moments of stillness, in the pauses between the rush of life, that she found the strength to keep going. As months passed, Lan discovered that she was more productive, more creative, and more fulfilled when she allowed herself the space to rest. She no longer equated rest with laziness, but with renewal. And in giving herself the gift of stillness, she not only healed her body but also her spirit.